The scratch of Gary's pen was the only sound in the courtroom. Slow, deliberate, almost theatrical. He wasn't signing. He was performing. Each stroke dragged across the divorce papers like he was enjoying every single one. Savoring the finality of it, the way someone savors the last bite of a meal they cooked for themselves. His lips curled into that familiar smirk. The one Judy had spent 10 years learning to read, 10 years learning to fear. He didn't look up. Didn't need to. He already knew exactly how she looked sitting across from him. Small. Broken. Done. Then he leaned back, set the pen down with a soft click, and whispered, just loud enough for the whole room to hear, "Finally free." The courtroom was wood-paneled and cold, the kind of room that felt designed to make everything inside it feel permanent. And in that room, the power in the space belonged entirely to one person. Gary Stewart sat like he owned the air. His charcoal suit fit him the way armor fits a knight. Not just well, but intentionally. Every line was pressed. Every button was deliberate. He leaned back in his chair with the loose confidence of a man who had already counted the money and known it was more than enough. His attorney, a sharp, expensive man named Richard Voss, sat beside him, equally polished, equally unbothered. They didn't need to speak to each other. The body language said everything. This is already decided. Across the mahogany table, Judy Smith sat very still. She wore a simple navy blouse. Clean, pressed, nothing more. Her hands were folded in her lap, fingers laced tight, knuckles white in a way no one could see beneath the table. A single tear traced down the left side of her face. She didn't wipe it. She didn't move at all. She looked exactly the way Gary needed her to look, like a woman who had already accepted that she had lost. And for 10 years, that is exactly the woman Gary had been building. He had done it slowly, the way you hollow out a tree from the inside so it still looks standing from the street. He had convinced her to leave her job. He had gently, persistently, lovingly suggested that they didn't need separate accounts, that trust meant sharing everything, that her family didn't understand him the way she did. He had turned her world smaller and smaller until the only door she could see was the one that led back to him. And now here they were, the end of it written neatly on a piece of paper, and Gary was signing it like it was nothing more than a receipt. Judy's attorney, Miss Clara Webb, sat beside her. A lean, quiet woman with reading glasses and a manila folder she hadn't opened yet. She'd taken the case pro bono. She'd warned Judy how this would look. Gary had the better team, the longer reach, and 10 years of carefully constructed leverage. The settlement on the table reflected all of it. The house mortgaged beyond its worth. Car that rattled when it rained. And an alimony figure so small it wouldn't cover a single month of the life Gary had trained her to need. Gary's pen had stopped moving. He glanced up, not at Judy but past her, toward the gallery, where a woman sat in the third row. Lisa Donovan. Blonde hair, designer coat, a smile she didn't bother hiding. Gary's coworker. Gary's affair. The woman he had been planning his exit around for months, maybe longer. Lisa caught his eye and tilted her head, just slightly. A small nod. "You've got this." Gary turned back to the table, picked up the pen again, tapped it once against the paper, a sound like a gavel, and looked directly at Judy for the first time all morning. "You know," he said, leaning forward, his voice carrying that low, easy tone of a man who had never once in his life been told no. "Your mother would have been proud. A seamstress from the country, raising a daughter who ends up in a courtroom like this." He let out a breath that was almost a laugh. At least one of you figured out your place. The words landed like a slap. Judy's jaw tightened. Barely, just a flicker, but she said nothing. Clara Webb, beside her, went very still. Her hand moved slowly toward the manila folder in her lap. And from the front of the courtroom, behind the bench, Judge Patricia Reeves looked up from her paperwork. She had heard every word. Here is Chapter 1 formatted exactly as requested. Chapter 1. Judy had packed the dinner herself. Nothing extravagant. Just the chicken and roasted vegetables Gary used to say reminded him why he married her. She'd pressed the foil tight around the container, tucked it into a paper bag with a napkin and a fork, and driven across town with the window down, letting the evening air hit her face. She told herself it was a peace offering. She told herself that if she could just get him to sit down, just eat something with her, maybe they could find the seam of the marriage that was still holding and start pulling it back together. His office was on the 4th floor of a glass building downtown, the kind of place that hummed quietly with money. The door was ajar when she reached it. She almost knocked, almost called out his name, but something made her stop. Maybe it was the way his voice sounded on the other end of the hallway. Not the careful, measured tone he used with her at home, but something looser, warmer, almost playful. The voice of a man who was enjoying himself. She pressed herself against the wall beside the door frame and listened. He was on the phone with Lisa. That much was clear from the first few seconds. But it wasn't the kind of conversation Judy had imagined. Not whispered, not guilty. It was casual, businesslike even. Gary was talking about the divorce the way he talked about quarterly projections, timelines, numbers, which accounts needed to move where before the paperwork was filed. He mentioned a figure, something offshore, something Lisa would hold in her name until things settled down, and laughed at something she said on the other end. A low, easy laugh. The laugh of a man who had already won and was just enjoying the final steps. Judy stood in that hallway for what felt like a long time. The paper bag hung at her side, the foil still warm against her palm. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. She didn't feel the sharp, jagged thing she had expected to feel. The betrayal, the fury, the collapse. What she felt instead was quieter than all of those things. It was a door closing somewhere deep inside her chest. A lock turning. A small, cold, precise click. She set the bag down on the floor outside his door, and she left without a sound. Chapter 2. The morning after the hallway, Judy woke up and made Gary's coffee before he was out of the shower. She folded his shirt. She asked him, in a voice that sounded exactly the way he needed it to sound, how his day had been the night before. He told her it was fine. She nodded. She smiled, small, grateful, the way he liked, and something behind her eyes stayed perfectly, dangerously still. For 6 months, Judy played the role like it was the only role she had ever known. Quiet, compliant, a little sad maybe, but not sad enough to be inconvenient. She made his meals. She kept the house clean. She didn't ask about the accounts, the trips, or the late nights. She gave him nothing to push against, no friction, no resistance. No reason to look at her more closely than he already did. Gary noticed none of it. That was the point. But twice a week, on afternoons when Gary was at the office and the house was empty, Judy drove to a small, unassuming office on the east side of town. The sign on the door reads simply, Webb Family Law. Inside, behind a cluttered desk stacked with manila folders and half-empty coffee cups, sat Miss Clara Webb. Clara was not the kind of woman who wasted words. She was lean, sharp-eyed, with reading glasses she wore on a chain around her neck and a way of flipping through paperwork that made it feel like she was reading minds. A mutual friend, one of the few Judy had left, after years of Gary's quiet, patient isolation, had recommended her. Clara had taken the case without hesitation.
Pro bono.
No questions about whether Judy could pay. Only one question, asked on the very first afternoon, with her glasses pushed up on her forehead and her eyes fixed on Judy's. How long has he been hiding money? Judy told her what she had heard in the hallway. Clara didn't flinch. She wrote it down. Then she leaned back and said something Judy would remember for months afterward. Men like Gary don't hide money because they're greedy. They hide it because they planned to leave long before you knew they were thinking about it. From that day forward, Clara began pulling threads. Bank statements, property records, shell company filings. Each visit, the folder on her desk grew thicker. Each visit, Judy left feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Not hope. Not yet. Something harder than hope. Something that felt like the first breath after nearly drowning. Chapter 3. Gary had been asking her to clear out the closet for weeks. Not asking exactly, nudging. The way he always did, with a comment here, a sigh there, dropped casually into the middle of other conversations like a stone into still water. Your mom's stuff is still taking up the whole spare room, isn't it? Might be good to finally sort through it. Let some of it go. He said it gently. He always said it gently. That was how Gary worked. He made you feel like the idea was yours. Eleanor Smith had died 14 months earlier. Quietly, the way she had lived. In a hospice room with the curtains drawn and Judy holding her hand. Gary had attended the funeral. He had stood in the back, hands in his coat pockets, and afterward told Judy it was sad but that grief had a shelf life. You don't want to let it keep you stuck, he said. He had a talent for making cruelty sound like care. So Judy started clearing. She folded sweaters. She boxed up old photographs and kitchen things her mother no longer needed. She moved through the closet methodically, the way Gary would have wanted, efficient, thorough, done. But the closet in the spare bedroom was deep, and Eleanor had been a woman who kept things tucked away. Judy worked her way toward the back, pulling out coats and fabric scraps and old shoeboxes full of thread and buttons, until her hand brushed against something solid and cold, pushed flush against the back wall. It was a box. Not large, about the size of a shoebox, but heavier. Sealed with a strip of packing tape that had gone brittle and yellow with age. Judy pulled it free and set it on the bed. She sat down beside it for a long time before she opened it. Inside, the first thing she saw was paper. Business letterhead, thick, cream-colored stock, the kind that cost money. Printed with a name she didn't recognize. Sterling Textile Group. Beneath it, a stack of contracts, dense with legal language, dates stretching back decades. And at the very bottom, a photograph, black and white, slightly faded at the edges. Her mother stood beside a man in an expensive suit, both of them in front of a building Judy didn't recognize. Eleanor was smiling. Not the quiet, careful smile Judy knew from childhood. Something wider, something proud. Judy didn't understand what any of it meant. Not yet. But she placed the box gently on the shelf beside her bed, and she did not throw it away. Chapter 4. It was 3 days before Judy went back to the box. Not because she forgot it was there. It sat on the shelf beside her bed like a quiet, patient thing, waiting. She went back because something about it wouldn't leave her alone. A feeling she couldn't quite name. Not curiosity exactly. Something deeper. The sense that the box had been waiting for her to be ready. She opened it again on a Thursday afternoon, after Gary had left for the office and the house had gone still. This time she didn't start at the top. She reached past the contracts, past the letterhead, past the photograph, and dug her fingers to the very bottom. And there, folded once and tucked beneath everything else like it had been hidden on purpose, was an envelope. Her name was written on the front in her mother's handwriting. That small, careful script Judy would have recognized anywhere. She held it for a long time before she opened it. Eleanor's letter was not long. It was written in the same quiet, deliberate way her mother had spoken. No extra words, nothing wasted. She began simply, "I have kept this from you, and I need you to understand why." Eleanor explained that decades ago, long before Judy was born, she had built something. Not alone. She had a partner, a man named Arthur Calloway, whose name appeared on the letterhead but whose role was, in truth, secondary. The business was hers. The money was hers. The empire, as Eleanor called it plainly and without vanity, belonged to her. But she had built it under silence, deliberately invisible, because she had learned early in life that women who held wealth visibly were women the world found ways to take it from. So she hid it. She let the world see a seamstress, a quiet mother from the country. She kept the contracts in a box and the money in places no one thought to look. And when she knew she was dying, she made sure that everything, every cent, every document, every piece of what she had built, would pass to Judy. Legally, irrevocably. The letter ended on a single line. Judy read it once, then again, then a third time, the words settling into her chest like something warm and permanent. "You were never small, my daughter. I made sure of that." Judy folded the letter carefully, pressed it against her chest, and sat in the quiet of the empty house, and for the first time in 10 years, she did not feel small. Chapter 5. Judy brought the box to Clara on a Tuesday. She didn't say much when she set it down on the desk, just slid it across the cluttered surface and watched Clara's face. Clara looked at the box, then at Judy, then opened it the way a surgeon opens a kit. Carefully, with full attention, touching nothing she didn't need to touch. She spent the first 10 minutes reading in silence. The only sound in the office was the quiet rustle of pages and the occasional scratch of Clara's pen against her notepad. Judy sat in the chair across the desk with her hands in her lap, watching. She had learned, in these weeks of secret meetings, that Clara was not a woman who rushed toward conclusions. She moved toward them the way water moves toward the sea. Slowly, inevitably, with force that didn't need to announce itself. When Clara finally looked up, her glasses were pushed to the top of her head and her expression was unreadable. She set her pen down. Then she picked up the photograph, Eleanor beside the man in the expensive suit, and held it under the small lamp on her desk for a long moment. "Sterling Textile Group," Clara said, almost to herself. She turned to her computer and began typing. Judy watched her eyes move across the screen. Fast, scanning, the way they did when something had caught her attention. Minutes passed. Clara's jaw tightened, just slightly. She leaned closer to the monitor. Then she sat back. "Judy." Clara's voice was different now. Not sharper, quieter. The way a person's voice goes quiet when the thing they suspected turns out to be bigger than they imagined. "Do you have any idea what Sterling Textile Group is worth?" Judy shook her head. Clara wrote a number on the notepad and turned it around. Judy stared at it. The number sat there, plain and still, and it took her several seconds to count the zeros. When she did, something shifted inside her. Not a jolt, not a gasp. Something slower. A weight lifting. A door swinging open onto a room she had never known existed. Clara leaned forward, her hands folded on the desk. Gary's entire net worth, the accounts we've found, the properties, all of it, doesn't come close. Judy looked at the number again. And for the first time in years, longer than she could remember, she did not feel afraid. What she felt instead was something she barely recognized. Something old and heavy and quietly, dangerously alive. She felt power. Chapter 6. The courthouse was a tall, gray building on the corner of a street Judy had driven past 100 times without ever thinking twice about. She had never imagined she would walk through its doors. Now she stood in the lobby, manila folder tucked beneath Clara's arm, and watched the morning light fall cold and flat across the marble floor. Gary arrived before she did. Of course he did. He walked through the front entrance the way he walked into every room, like the space had been waiting for him, like the air itself rearranged to make way. He wore a charcoal suit, pressed and fitted, and beside him walked two attorneys. Richard Voss, the senior partner, broad-shouldered and silver-haired, and beside him a younger man named Ellis, sharp-jawed and quick-eyed, the kind of lawyer who enjoyed the fight. Gary laughed at something Ellis said as they passed through the corridor. The sound carried. It was meant to. Judy entered quietly. She wore a simple cream blouse and dark trousers. Clean, pressed, nothing that drew attention. Clara walked beside her, unhurried, the folder held close against her side. Judy's hands were steady. Her face was calm. Not the kind of calm that comes from peace, but the kind that comes from knowing something no one else in the room knows yet. She had practiced this, the stillness, the composure, in the mirror for weeks. Not because she was afraid of looking weak, because she needed Gary to believe she still was. They took their seats on opposite sides of the mahogany table. Gary glanced across at Judy and smiled. That easy, lazy smile, the one that said this is already decided. Judy met his eyes for exactly 1 second, then looked down at her hands. Let him have it, she thought. Let him have this last one. The hearing began. Judge Patricia Reeves entered the room and took her seat at the bench. A composed woman with reading glasses and an unhurried bearing that suggested she had seen everything this courtroom had to offer. Voss stood almost immediately. The settlement terms were laid out in clean, clipped language. The house, the car, the small monthly figure that Clara had already told Judy was an insult dressed up as generosity. Gary's pen hovered over the page. Ready. Clara stood. Your Honor, before we proceed, I would like to request a brief recess. Gary's pen stopped. Voss turned his head. Ellis looked up from his notes. Clara's voice was steady and unhurried, and she held the folder just a little tighter against her side. There is something I need to file. Chapter 7. The recess lasted 12 minutes. Judy counted them. She sat on a wooden bench in the corridor outside the courtroom with her hands folded in her lap, listening to the quiet hum of the building around her, and she waited. Clara had disappeared into a side office with the bailiff and the folder. Judy didn't need to be in the room to know what was happening. They had rehearsed this. Every step, every document, every word. When the doors opened again and they filed back in, the energy in the room had shifted, subtle, almost imperceptible, like a change in air pressure before a storm. Clara walked to her seat with the folder gone from her arm. It had been handed to the court. It was in the record now. There was no taking it back. Voss noticed first. He leaned over to Ellis and whispered something, his brow creasing in a way Judy had not seen before. Then he straightened, smoothed his tie, and turned toward the bench with the practiced ease of a man who had talked his way out of worse. Your Honor, whatever Ms. Webb has just filed, we would like the opportunity to review it before any further proceedings. This feels like a delay tactic, and frankly, Gary cut him off. He hadn't even looked at the documents. He didn't need to, or so he believed. He leaned back in his chair, rolled his eyes, and let out a breath that was almost a laugh. What is this about? Judy's mother. He shook his head, still smiling. The woman owned a sewing box and a pair of work boots. Whatever's in that folder, it's not going to change anything. The courtroom went quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes from people holding their breath. The kind that comes when someone in authority stops moving. Judge Reeves sat behind the bench, the preliminary filing open in front of her, her reading glasses low on her nose. She had not looked up when Gary spoke. She did not look up now. She turned a page, then another. Her expression gave away nothing, but her stillness gave away everything. Gary noticed it before anyone else did. A flicker of something crossing his face. Not fear, not yet. Just the first faint crack of a man realizing the room had stopped paying attention to him. Because for the first time since the hearing began, Judge Patricia Reeves was not looking at Gary Stewart. She was looking at Judy. Chapter 8. Court resumed at exactly 2:15. Judge Reeves entered the room and took her place at the bench without a word. She did not sit the way she had that morning, settled, unhurried, above the proceedings. She sat the way someone sits when they are about to say something that matters. Straight, still, present in a way that made the whole room lean forward without meaning to. She did not pick up her gavel. She picked up the will. I am going to read this document into the record, she said. Her voice was even measured, the kind of voice that had spent decades in rooms exactly like this one. In its entirety. Voss opened his mouth. Judge Reeves looked at him once. A single, quiet look, and he closed it again. She began to read. The language of the will was precise and legal, but beneath it ran something else. Something that sounded almost like a story. Eleanor Smith, sole and majority owner of Sterling Textile Group, a holding company founded in 1987. Silent partner for over 3 decades. The name on the contracts. The signature on the accounts. The woman who had built an empire so quietly that the world had never bothered to look twice. The courtroom was absolutely still. Judge Reeves turned the page and continued. The assets were listed one by one. Properties, accounts, equity stakes. Each number landing in the silence like a stone dropped into deep water. And then she reached the line that made the air in the room change. Sterling Textile Group holds majority ownership of the commercial property at 440 Thornton Avenue. Judge Reeves read, not looking up, including the building currently housing the municipal court, 3rd District. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The building they were sitting in. The room they were standing in. The bench Judge Reeves herself was seated behind. All of it Eleanor's. Judy did not turn to look at Gary. She didn't need to. She could feel it, the shift in the air beside her, the way the space around him seemed to contract. His breathing had changed. That was enough. Judge Reeves finished reading. She set the document down and removed her glasses. In the gallery, Lisa Donovan sat very still for exactly 3 seconds. Then she stood, gathered her coat without looking at anyone, and walked out of the courtroom. The door closed behind her with a sound that echoed longer than it should have. Chapter 9. Judge Reeves let the silence sit for a long time before she spoke. Not because she needed to think, because she wanted every person in that room to feel the weight of what was coming before it arrived. When she finally spoke, her voice had not changed. Same even tone, same measured cadence. But something beneath it had shifted. Something harder. Something final. This court has reviewed the documents submitted by Ms. Webb into the record this afternoon. We have also reviewed the financial disclosures provided by Mr. Stewart's legal team over the course of these proceedings. She paused. There are significant discrepancies. Voss stood. Your Honor. Mr. Voss. Sit down. He sat. Judge Reeves laid it out with the kind of calm precision that made it impossible to look away. The offshore accounts. The shell transfers. The assets moved quietly, deliberately over the course of months, routed through names that weren't Gary's, into accounts that didn't appear on any of the documents his attorneys had submitted to the court. All of it documented. All of it verified. All of it entered now into the criminal record. Gary's attorney stopped trying to speak halfway through. Ellis closed his notepad. Voss stared at the table in front of him like it had done something wrong. Gary himself sat very still. The color had not returned to his face since the will was read. He looked like a man trying to find a door in a room with no doors. His eyes moving, his jaw tight, his hands flat against the table as if he could hold himself steady by grip alone. Judge Reeves turned to him directly. Mr. Stewart, you have one choice before this court. Full restitution, every cent defrauded from this marriage, returned. Or this matter moves to criminal prosecution. You have until end of business Friday to decide. The gavel came down. Not loud. It didn't need to be. Clara leaned over and whispered something to Judy. Judy nodded once. Then she stood slowly the way you stand when you want to feel the ground beneath you, and turned toward the bailiff. There was one final document on the table. The alimony agreement. Clara had already told her she didn't need to sign it. Judy looked at it for a moment, then pushed it gently to the center of the table, untouched. She didn't sign it. She didn't sign anything else. Then she turned. Gary was looking at her, really looking, maybe for the first time in 10 years, as if he was seeing something he had never accounted for. Judy held his eyes, not with anger, not with triumph, with something quieter and more devastating than either. She held them long enough for him to understand. Then she turned, walked to the courtroom doors and pushed them open. The hallway beyond was bright with afternoon light. Clara fell into step beside her. Neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to say. Judy walked out of that building the way her mother had built an empire, quietly, deliberately, and on her own terms. Thank you for watching this video to the end. I am pretty sure you enjoy it. We have a lot of other interesting and beautiful story lineup for you already. So click image showing on your screen to watch more.